Welcome everyone to Top Trends in Digital Marketing. This is really an exciting opportunity for me to be here, to be able to meet with many of you, which I look forward to doing. One thing that I wanted to say before we get started is we have a number of folks in the room here, obviously, but there's even more folks that are tuning in online. And I really would love for this to be as interactive as possible. And so we've built in some time to be able to ask questions. I'm going to be asking you some questions. And for folks that are following along virtually, I should say participating virtually, if you have any questions, we're going to be monitoring the chat, and Boran will put them into the microphone so we can kind of talk about them. The one thing I would say, if anyone has any questions, you can either kind of shout them out at me. I'll make sure that I kind of say them so everyone can hear them virtually, or you can get up to the mic just to make sure that everybody can hear them that are following along virtually. All good? Amazing. Well, let's get started. Welcome everyone. So before I get started, I'll give a little bit of an introduction of who I am. My name is Tim Dolan. I've been working in digital marketing my whole career since I had a long flowing hair. I started very back. I don't blame my hair loss completely on digital marketing, but I do think it potentially was a factor. As you can see, I'm also a big fan of brown sweaters. And all different formats, not necessarily the same size, but anyway, that's me. And so I have been working with a number of different brands around different facets of digital marketing throughout my entire career. Over the last 8 years, I've been working in my own consultancy called Kickframe, and we do a mix of digital consulting from a strategy perspective as well as training. One of the things that got me here, other than an invite from Catherine Carlton, was during COVID, I was the designer and instructor for an amazing course we put on called the Digital Marketing and Fundraising for the Arts course. I think I see one of our participants back there. And it was to say it was one of the highlights of my career to be able to connect with a lot of these arts administrators and marketers is an understatement. It was really amazing to be able to connect with and learn from the arts community. And so when Catherine invited me here to share a little bit more around the topic of digital marketing, I really jumped at the chance. But that's enough about me. The role that I'm going to play here in the next, call it 55 minutes, is more of a fortune teller, not someone that's as creepy as someone's on the screen. But we're going to look a little bit further ahead because we're going to be talking about digital marketing trends here. And I just want to reinforce along the way, if anyone has any questions, I'm going to ask some questions of you. I'd love for this to be as interactive and conversational as possible. It's always a little bit weird being on stage to be able to have that dynamic, but to the degree that we can, I would love for it to happen. So before we get into what we're going to cover within this session, I want to kind of cover what we're not going to cover. This is not a presentation and conversation about why digital marketing is important. It's 2023, and I think everyone sort of understands the importance of it. And so even there was an older Capacity Interactive study that was done that showed well over 4 in 5 people are using digital channels to be able to find tickets. And the same study showed that close to 100% of orchestras and arts organizations were planning to use digital marketing to reopen post-COVID. So what this presentation and conversation is more about is about how digital marketing is changing and what you can do about it. And so we're going to do that by talking about digital marketing trends. And we think about what trends are, it's sort of the changes that are happening to something. And the way that I kind of like to think about digital marketing trends are kind of like waves. They're these things that are sort of constantly occurring. And what we need to be doing as marketers is try to have the mentality of almost a surfer. We're out in the water. We want to look behind us to see what's coming in, to see what are these sort of waves or digital trends look like, to see if these are ones that we want to jump on, these ones that we want to pass by, ones that we really want to avoid. And so I think that kind of analogy is appropriate for us to think about what these sort of trends are and the impact that they might have on us to be able to take advantage or not. I'm going to be going through 4 different trends, plus a couple of other topics as well, that I think are waves worth considering. And this isn't to say you need to jump on all of these, but I think all of us as kind of marketers have to be aware of them. The first one is I'm going to go through is the dawn of generative AI. I would love to hear some conversation and ideas and experiences about that. The prioritization of first-party data, number two. The TikTokification of media and attention, and the cultivation and monetization of community. So that's what we're going to be covering here over the next few minutes. So the dawn of generative AI. What is generative AI? How do we sort of define it? What comes to mind when we think about generative AI? Things like ChatGPT as an example. Any thoughts come to mind? Yes, yes. The horrifying parts about art being generated. Yeah. Any other kind of thoughts come to mind when we think about generative AI? Using AI as a brainstorming tool, exactly. So those of you, how many just by hands have used ChatGPT? Most people, okay. It's amazing, yeah. So we'll get into this a little bit more. So generative AI, if you're not familiar with it, are algorithms and models that are built on the ability to sort of generate new things. As we talked about, generating art, it could be copy, it could be images, it could be audio, it could be video. From a marketer's perspective, a lot of the assets and things that we produce as part of our campaigns. And it is this, to borrow this wave analogy, which I'm going to beat to death, by the way, over the next 45 minutes, it is a huge wave. So what we're looking at here is search volume in Google through Google Trends around a volume of people searching for AI or ChatGPT. There's a huge amount of interest. You know, it's just really been launched in the last couple of months, and the majority of us in here have actually used it in one way or the other. And in fact, it has scaled so quickly, it's historic. And so it has 100 million monthly active users just 2 months after launch, and it reached 100 million people using this tool in just 5 days. It's pretty remarkable, like how quickly it kind of captured our imagination and just had a fit for how people were starting to use it. And the other part of it too is I don't want to just constrain our conversation about generative AI to ChatGPT, although that's sort of the dominant tool within this increasingly large toolbox. There's a number of different specialized tools that are starting to bubble up. These are based on the same kinds of models and technology, but they're really starting to be focused on producing specific kinds of things. And those could be images, copy, video, speech. A lot of these different assets that we have marketers kind of take up our time to be able to create. And so these tools are kind of launching really quickly. And so it's almost difficult to be able to kind of catch up. I'm just going to highlight a couple of them, the more popular ones. I'm not recommending them, but just for illustration purposes for those that aren't that familiar with this technology. So there's new tools that are popping up that help us to be able to create copy. You know, how much time is spent right now creating copy for email or posts within social media or copy that is on the website to be able to cover an event or a particular topic that you want to be able to communicate about? A lot of time. So these new tools are coming to be able to help you format, rewrite, and create a lot of these tools more efficiently. Crazy. Has anyone used some of these for copying? Not copying, for copy, which is kind of copying generally, Freudian slip. So probably about, I would say 20%. Creating images, you probably see this kind of flooding in your timeline of people using tools like Midjourney to create these different kinds of assets that are really interesting. And if you haven't used these tools, you're putting in different combinations of what are referred to as prompts, which are kind of instructions via text about what you want to be able to see. And some of the images are kind of crazy, and some of these images are pretty amazing. There's been a number of instances where people have put in some of these images that have been created by AI into contests and winning, photography contests as an example. And so that's another kind of tool that's built on the same technology. And the one that's closest to me probably from somebody that kind of grew up more closely to technology is actually designing websites in code. There's a number of tools that are sort of like you can put in different sketches or instructions, and using the different patterns that have been established on the web can start to create code or wireframes for different kinds of applications that somebody might be dreaming up. pretty amazing and mind-blowing. It really does remind me of the early days of the internet when I started to work on it, where it was just this kind of mind-blowing fundamental technology that people were just trying to apply to a whole bunch of different instances. What does the internet mean to pets? What does internet mean to music? What does internet mean to everything? And we're sort of doing the same thing with AI. What does it mean to marketing? What does it mean to different facets of not just different facets of business, but of facets of life? So what does this all mean? And I want to really kind of focus on providing you with a little bit of kind of practical advice and not just make this interesting, which hopefully it is. Well, there's a couple of different attitudes when it comes to AI, if you follow this along. Is AI going to be something that kind of threatens humanity and we're going to be subservient to the robots? Or are we going to be using the tools to become using them as servants for us? And call me optimistic or someone that might not want to dwell on the elimination of humanity, but I'm in the camp of using this as a robot servant. And so at least for the short term, before we start to sort of see the exponential growth within AI, I think we have to kind of look through it from a marketing perspective of the lens through which a lot of these tools could be able to help us. As I mentioned, the course that I taught before and met some of you within arts administrators, one of the things that really I took away was just how resource constrained a lot of your organizations are. And so I really felt bad when I started to be able to do some of the course where I was talking about some of these different things. And I was saying, when you start to talk with your marketing colleagues, what do they say? Like, marketing colleagues, I'm the marketing department right here. And so when I think about some of the value that some of these tools could potentially provide, I think there's a really interesting fit because the practical application, at least in the short and medium term, is a lot of these tools, with the exception of maybe some of the image tools, which are kind of like a different form of image, you can do some of the different tasks that take up a lot of our time in marketing quicker, cheaper, but for now, not necessarily better. And so how do we start to explore the use of some of these tools in our workflows to be able to free us up more time to do the things that currently a lot of these tools can't do, which is bringing your personality, creativity, originality, point of view to what we're doing within marketing, and using some of these tools to kind of address some of the work that is a little bit time consuming and doesn't require that same amount of imagination. So just a couple of examples that aren't familiar with ChatGPT. So this is the interface. It sounded like most people have used it. But the advice that I would provide you is when you're using ChatGPT, you give it a role, you ask it to complete a task, and then you give it a format for how you would want the results created. And so here, if I'm hosting a conference for people who work at orchestras, that's who you are, I'm giving it a role. What are 5 topics to feature? That's the task. And I could be telling it, writing it in a list, but that's inferring it from the prompts that I'm providing. And so it looks like I'm providing here the suggestion of number 3 that's a little bit more about digital transformation. Kind of scary. In brainstorming ideas, I think you mentioned kind of utilizing ChatGPT just to come up with some new ideas. So I'm a speaker at a conference. I need to come up with a catchy title, list possible titles for my presentation. What's my favorite thing here? A Maestro's Guide to Digital Harmony, Orchestrating Your Online Success. For somebody that titled this The Top Trends in Digital Marketing, I'm a little bit jealous. I think I should have come to this a little bit quicker. And so it's not to say that these are perfect, but if I'm looking for ideas, this could be sort of my companion to generate some of these ideas a little bit more quickly. It still requires human judgment and refinement to be able to make sure that this is kind of responsible as well as aligned to what you want to be able to present as a brand. But as a tool to be able to help you generate some of these ideas, I think it's kind of promising, even in the short term. Writing promotional emails, like how many people have slaved away at the right kind of wording within emails, particularly I'm thinking of the fundraisers within the audience. And I think there's some really interesting applications to be able to sort of give it some messaging, to be able to use this as a companion to write out different versions of the same kind of email. One of the things that's really interesting when you start to use the tools is you get much better at the prompts and you get much better at utilizing refinement. And so what comes out at first is not going to be what you use, but it's great to be able to, for example, say, I want to be able to reduce this by 50%. I want to be able to change the tone to be more casual or more professional. I'm not saying you're offloading all these responsibilities to the tool. What I'm saying is these could be helpful companions to be able to bring some efficiencies into a really resource constrained environment, which I know that you're all facing. That's generative AI. Anyone have any thoughts or questions around generative AI and some of the applications that it might have within orchestras? Anyone online? Remember, you can put something into chat and we'll share it here within the room. Yep. Yep. Yeah, I think that's, you bring up a great point. And I think there's two things that are happening at the same time. One is kind of the regulation around a lot of these outputs with the exponential growth and use of these tools. And so you're exactly right. That's something that's been grappling around. How do we start to do that? Boran? Oh, yes. I'm sorry. Yeah, or I can repeat it as well. Yeah. Amazing.
I think the question around plagiarism is not really a question about regulation, which, by the way, as a former government regulator, I'm okay with regulation in principle. But anyway, I think that question was a question around intellectual property rights. That's a different thing. It's ownership of intellectual property. And, people were, probably some people were thinking, maybe that's a way to get concert programs to happen. You think about that. Well, right now we hire an artistic director to do that thinking. We're to look at it doing it this way. What does that mean about how we think about those intellectual property rights and that side of things? So I think you need to think about that when you're using these tools.
Yeah, great perspective. Thank you for sharing. Amazing. So we could go really deep into this, but it just feels like we're really kind of like at a profound moment where a lot of these tools are starting to kind of grow and capture our imagination and use cases in a really exponential way. So, some more to come on that for sure. The next trend that I want to talk about is the prioritization of first-party data and how important this is becoming. So the backdrop of this, I think, is just how marketing and the management and creation of a lot of marketing programs is really becoming more and more integrated with software. You think about like how we used to, create different assets for marketing programs way back in the day. It wasn't really a requirement to be able to be proficient around a lot of these different software tools in the way that they are now, and that continues to grow. And so you think about like how a lot of different facets of digital marketing are kind of managed, and marketing in general is managed today. We're using kind of sophisticated CRM tools to be able to manage your email marketing. We're using different DSPs and platforms to be able to manage our media buys, and different automation tools to be able to kind of do social media management. I kind of look back at one of my first summer jobs working at the Yellow Pages, where they had a huge art department where I had to pull out reference visuals for this team of artists to be able to do those little ads that would be appearing in printed directories. And now I look at how ads are created within Google, where you're just uploading different assets. It's doing different combinations of those assets within ads, and the ones that perform well get optimized, and that's what you're moving towards. And that's kind of happened within the last sort of 25 years. And so, marketing is increasingly driven by software. But a lot of these different marketing and ad tech technologies that we're using every day are driven by one thing, and that is data. And how we identify the different audiences and segments and individuals that we want to be able to reach. If we don't have accurate and rich data to be able to create those segments, to be able to reach those individuals and communicate within a relevant way, the promise of a lot of these digital marketing tools really becomes disadvantaged. And the thing that's kind of happening within the space now, and you've probably seen this yourself, either as a user of digital media or as somebody that might be managing different digital marketing campaigns, is it's getting harder to be able to get some of the data that we've typically used to be able to do digital advertising. And so when we look at things like the moves that Apple's making around privacy, when we see the moves that are being made around the depreciation of cookies, which are essentially identifiers to be able to do things like retargeted advertising starting to go away, we really start to see the depreciation of the accuracy of this data, and as a result, the performance of a lot of digital advertising going down. I was speaking to a contact of mine that runs a direct-to-consumer e-commerce business, and it's really been sort of driven exclusively by digital advertising. But the performance of the advertising, because the depreciation of this third-party data is getting so bad that they're really kind of struggling as a business. And so the prioritization for him and for, I think, all marketers is around first-party data. And so those that aren't close to it, what do we mean by first-party data? That's essentially the data that you're getting from your patrons or your fundraisers directly from the audiences that you intend to serve. It's not being acquired by another advertiser or partner or being generated by an ad platform. And so this is what you have within your CRM. It's what you have within your analytics platforms. It's what you can use to be able to identify and target people using digital advertising. So first-party data is becoming really, really important to be able to kind of live up to the promise of digital advertising, which is doing a lot more one-to-one marketing at scale. So what should we do? What do we mean with this, increasing privacy, regulations coming, a lot of these browsers removing cookies, marketers not having access to the same third-party data to be able to do more targeted advertising at scale. I think there's sort of a shift that's happening, if we look at sort of the waves that are coming, around moving less from renting to owning. And so what do I mean by that? I think oftentimes when we're using third-party data, you're sort of renting it from some of these providers like Google that might be capturing it within their audiences. We're also renting attention when we're paying for display on things like social media with the advertising that we do. I think there's a bigger shift happening around organizations looking at more owning. These are my audiences that I want to be able to communicate with. These are the channels that I want to be able to manage. I want to be able to capture and manage the data that's actually going to be used to be able to target them and communicate them with relevance. And so it's a move towards more ownership around the audience and the data that's used to be able to target them efficiently, owning over renting. So how do we do that? There's sort of two parts to it, I would argue. The first part is this concept that looks more confusing than it actually is on the slide. It's just this idea of the value exchange. If I'm a patron of an orchestra, what are you providing to me that is going to be of interest, that is going to continue to get me coming back, that's going to give you permission to be able to contact me, to keep me engaged over time? And some of that could be through things that you're already doing, through things like social media and email. But I would argue we want to step back a little bit because of the importance of first-party data and say, what else can we unlock? What else is of value to the people that are actually of interest for the orchestra? Is it access to other kinds of content that isn't available to anyone else, or service benefits, or access to some of the talent and facilities? What are some of the other things that we can do to be able to sort of, capture that attention, get people to enroll and get people coming back? Because not only does that sort of create that stronger direct connection to the audiences that you want to have a stronger and more profitable relationship with, what it also does is give you the basis to be able to capture more data about the people that you want to be able to reach. The data is the fuel to be able to use the software to be able to communicate them with relevance at scale. And so we can start to capture more data over time about to be able to create segments and recognize individuals to be able to target them efficiently. We can move from somebody being completely anonymous to somebody that's a bit more recognized, that we can do more targeted content. So how do we start to do that? And I think this is kind of a longer conversation. I know we're covering a lot of ground here, but it's thinking about a couple of things. What are the different data points you need to be able to do the kinds of marketing that you want to be able to do? Is there one or two questions you'd love to be able to ask that can put somebody into a bucket A or bucket B that have different kinds of needs that you want to treat very, very differently? I would start on the strategy level of thinking, what are the kind of things that we need to be able to do to be able to empower the segmentation that I want to be able to provide? And then it's having the mechanisms and interfaces in place to be able to capture that kind of data in a relevant and easy and unintimidating way. We're not asking people to sign up for mortgages here. When you're signing up for an email, we don't want to ask all this kind of information, but there might be a couple of questions that we continue to ask to be able to get a better sense of who our audiences are. And there's some really interesting examples that are done, particularly around email marketing programs, that are driving people to kind of look at the data that you have on them and add one more piece of data, or remind people to be able to kind of update their data that you have to make sure that it's current. One of the things that if anyone sort of manages a CRM database here, you'd recognize is about 20 to 30% of that database decays over time. People move, people stop responding. We want to get in the habit of having an ongoing program to not only capture more data, but have people validate it. Because without that sort of strong data, we can't do a lot of the targeted marketing that was really the great opportunity that we have for a lot of these different software channels. Any questions or comments about the importance of first-party data, or some of the things that you might have been seeing even with the decay of some of this data and the performance of your digital marketing? Okay. Next, the TikTokification of media and attention. Who is on TikTok or has used TikTok here before? All right, we have more ChatGPTers than we have TikTokers. Very interesting. Hopefully no one's on TikTok right now. If you do, please put the phone away because it just completely sucks you in. And so for those of you that haven't used TikTok before, I'll give a description of what it is now. It's, a social media platform for creating and sharing and discovering short videos. And what really makes it distinctive is it's really sort of created around this short form, catchy video that's shot vertically and that's algorithmically and personalized to you. And so you're just constantly swiping around these different short videos that really capture attention. And it seemed kind of funny at first. It was a bit of a fad when it started to come out. It was sort of connected a little bit more to music than to anything else. But it's been really interesting to see how it's evolved and the impact that it's had, on other social media platforms. So when I think about TikTok, I almost think about it's kind of this result of a couple of these other major trends that we would have covered if we were meeting together years past. Some of these waves that have turned out to be really important. We'd always been kind of moving towards more shorter video, adoption of social media, mobile usage, and then personalization. So it's kind of a product built on a number of other different trends. But the time spent, if we look at the impact of the amount of time that people are actually spending on social media, it's kind of mind-boggling. And so this is a relatively new platform. The usage numbers in terms of the amount of people that have downloaded and used it is really high. But the thing that's really remarkable is the amount of time that people are spending on the platform. And so we almost see it being double the amount of time that people are spending on TikTok than that being spent on Facebook or even Instagram. And so what does that mean? Well, platforms change based on where attention goes. And so all of the other platforms, the major platforms, are sort of moving in this direction as well. So if I look at YouTube, they have something called YouTube Shorts, which is their version of this kind of short form video that's algorithmically fed. And then Instagram has something called Reels, which does something quite similar. It was sort of interesting when Reels came out. If anyone's a real Instagram user here, there was a lot of backlash around, I went to Instagram for photos. What are all these videos doing? And so the organization Meta got a lot of criticism. Anyway, they had their earnings call last week, and the amount of time spent on the platform since putting in these short videos has increased 24%. And so what ends up happening from a business model perspective that I think we need to be aware of as marketers that might want to be engaged in these channels is a lot of these platforms are optimizing this kind of content. What do I mean by that? Well, if you're putting up a static piece of content versus a video piece of content, the way that they're organized now is they're going to be pushing more users to the video because that's where attention is going. So they're really optimizing the platform for where attention is being drawn. And so if you're an early adopter of this kind of format and are doing it well, you're capturing a greater share of attention versus if you were not adopting this kind of format. Make sense? So what does that start to mean? Well, I don't know if this is going to work here. Sorry about that. We used to kind of think, there's a couple of thoughts. So one is there was kind of this separation of like the marketing department and what's kind of happening within TikTok, which are and other social media platforms where there's influencers and there's creators. And then you have marketing departments trying to figure out how do you best kind of work together. And that's still an opportunity. But I think what's kind of happening is marketing departments and creators are starting to become closer and closer and closer. And so we need to start to think about how we can kind of embrace our inner creator. You know, what are some of the ways that we can do to be able to share our stories in these new and compelling ways? One of the things that I would really recommend is for those of you that aren't on TikTok, you don't have to become a personal creator or spend all your time there. I think it's really important to get an understanding of what the channel is, because there's some nuances to really what works within this format. And as you start to think about potentially creating content for it, you want to understand what are those sort of things that work natively within the platform. So there's no better way. I can't come up here and describe it. I think you really need to experience for yourself to see what the opportunity might be. And so we need to kind of think about our inner creators. And that, to break this down a little bit more from a practical perspective, what does that start to mean? Well, I think part of it is getting really comfortable with this as a format to be able to try to tell your stories in a slightly different way. The next is the technical production side, which is very different from doing something very, very highly produced. And so I remember working with advertising agencies doing their first sort of social media performances, and they were bringing all of the baggage of shooting these high fidelity commercials. And that's not really appropriate or required for this kind of format. And so a lot of the software that you might need to be able to produce what we're doing could actually be on your phone. So getting proficient around how we can do that. And finally, the last part is because I realize when I throw up a lot of these tactics, the immediate response is I don't have time to be able to do it, which is totally fair. I don't have the resources to be able to invest in it. But I think one of the things that, an idea that I really like is this concept of like the content flywheel. What are the ways that we can sort of capture content in a way that is kind of in rhythm to how we naturally operate? A lot of the things that you guys do are amazing and are of interest to people that aren't exposed to it all the time. Like that was one of my takeaways when I was doing like the course, was some of the things that you guys were talking about and things that we're sharing were like magic. And I think we kind of, maybe because you're around it all the time, it doesn't feel as kind of amazing as it is. But what are some of these other moments and things that you can kind of capture in your day-to-day that might be kind of interesting stories to tell that aren't going to require a huge production of time and investment to be able to produce? So what is that sort of content flywheel? How do you sort of capture this, this kind of content going forward? The other thing that I'd say, it's sort of a switch that I've definitely seen over the last 18 months, is that video was also seen as like when people were producing content for social media, it was kind of the nice to have, the expensive thing that we might get around to a couple times a year. But we're really going to be focusing a lot of text and images. And I think that's really flipped. A lot of folks are putting video at the core of the content that we're creating and distributing out through social media platforms. And per the earlier slides, the platforms are optimizing for it. Any questions or comments about that? Are we fans of this content? Anyone sharing content on TikTok right now from an orchestra's perspective or marketer's perspective? No? What about Reels?
Yeah, Reels. Our audience is on.
Sorry, would you mind just popping up? Yeah, thanks, David.
Audience is on Facebook, so we're doing more Reels. We just kind of started
Yeah.
playing around with it. I really don't think our audience is on TikTok, but it's really the same.
It's the same
It's
thing.
the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And what is, David, sorry to put you on the spot, but what has been like, any lessons around starting to put that kind of
Oh
content
no, it's
together?
all by accident.
Yeah.
It's just, it's no less. Maybe in a year, but everything changes so quickly that it's.
Yeah. What
you
about,
just
I'm
kinda
just
gotta-
curious too, like how, has it been difficult to be able to capture that stuff on video? Is it difficult sort of figuring out, oh, this is kind of a cool moment for
Well,
us to
no,
capture?
You can do it all on your phone. It's
Yeah.
kind of like, oh, I could take a picture, or I could spend 30 seconds and do a video. So it's
Yeah.
kind of just changing how you think about things. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, the static is not where. I guess if a picture tells 1,000 words, a video must be multiples of that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and people like the live kind of interaction.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, I think I love that, David. Like it's sort of a change in mindset, right? It's almost as muscle memory that we've kind of built up to be able to take pictures. And now we're sort of retraining ourselves to sort of capture these things in new ways. Awesome. All right. And these are sort of a little bit of overlapping trends, but one that I'm personally really focusing a lot on, because I think there's kind of change afoot, which I think is interesting for a lot of brands and organizations, including orchestras, is this cultivation and monetization of community. Yeah. You have a question?
Yes, we have a question that came in online
Great.
from Ken Hall. It's still about TikTok.
Yep.
He says that I find orchestra players are focused on always showing polished final products. Any suggestions on getting them to participate in this sort of content?
Yes, yes. Any thoughts on that before I'll share mine, but I would love to know from those that are closest to artists, if there's anyone that has any lessons around how do you get people more comfortable around this and not doing something that's as polished. Anyone? Yeah, please do.
One thing that's working for my clients is actually giving them a three-take limit.
Okay.
Because the content on TikTok is messier. It is more on the fly, and just giving a break
Yeah,
and saying, hey, you're going to get the best one in the first three. It's not going to get better.
yeah,
So just post it, record it and post it and move on with your life.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I love it. Great advice. Anyone else? I think part of this would come to my earlier point of just getting familiar with the platform, because exactly what you're saying, a lot of the things that really do well are those things that are unpolished, right? There are the things that feel a little bit more authentic. And so I'm not saying it's easy, but I do think that once you're a little bit familiar with what's kind of working, you can sort of like break down some of those barriers. But it's a great question. Thank you for asking. Check. So cultivation and monetization of community. And so this kind of overlaps a little bit with some of the things that we've already kind of talked about, but I did want to talk about it kind of specifically because I think there's some pretty cool things that we can explore. So social media is, I would describe it as kind of disturbing. This is what comes up in Google when I start to take a look. It's kind of crazy and wild and disturbing and fake, bad for mental health. And there was another one. It's ruining society. Somebody's saying it's good in there. So anyway, which really makes me sad because I remember the early days of social media and it was entirely positive and it was a great opportunity to be able to connect with people that I didn't see all the time around passion areas that I had and to be able to remain. And it's sort of sad for me about like how we've sort of moved into this place where it is legitimately bad for society. However, I think there's some real change afoot. And I think this is driven, I think, less by the business side. I think one of the big shifts that you've seen over the past, call it 5 years, is probably even longer, is a lot of these platforms becoming a lot less social and a lot more about media and advertising. And so there's this kind of vacant space around what does it mean to be sort of social and for people to be able to kind of cultivate community. And a shift that is sort of happening, and I think this is kind of a bigger wave to be able to kind of keep your eye on because I think it's pretty cool, is that there's this kind of move afoot, I think that's coming more organically around people that are sort of sick of social media to move from less horizontal platforms, things like Facebook, into more smaller, niche, private communities that are a bit more signal versus noise. And so there's nothing that digital marketing doesn't do better than buzzwords. And so here's one for you to be able to use is VSOPs, very small online platforms. And this is a trend that is on the horizon around these kind of smaller, places that have smaller communities, but more authentic connections. I think about some of the platforms that we've seen, and a lot of these have kind of emerged interesting like throughout COVID in terms of scale. Discord, which is kind of like a messaging system that's really focused on more of the gaming community. Substack, which started out as being kind of a paid newsletter, but is starting to become a little bit more social elements and, a potential rival to Twitter. Patreon and Twitch, things that are a little bit more closer to kind of fundraising and live streaming. So there's different platforms that are cultivating smaller, more authentic communities. Some of those are kind of organically driven around different passion areas and a community leader, but a lot of them are really kind of driven by creators themselves and organizations that want to foster more connectivity around the people that they're serving and their fans. And I think another kind of sub-trend within this is when you're involved with one of these kind of smaller communities that has more authenticity and relevant sort of connection. People are kind of there for quote unquote the right reasons. It's less about just sort of passively following. I think the expectation and behavior of people within these smaller communities becomes more leaning in, around, can you hear me? You can? Okay. I'll try to speak a little bit louder. Hopefully it's better. Okay. Um, people leaning in and participating a little bit more. So less about kind of passive following and more about, active engagement. And you see sort of examples like this where artists might be asking questions of the community to be able to help co-create things. What are the things that we want to do? I'd love your input in X. I think you're seeing more interest in doing those types of things within these smaller communities than we do with other, like the more horizontal platforms. And the other part too is, and if anyone has been involved in live streaming or has anyone used something like Twitch before? You folks? So Twitch is kind of a live streaming platform, but one of the things that you can do within it, which I think is really interesting, is that if you're a creator and you have a channel and you're doing something live, there are ways to monetize that are really kind of unconventional. And so part of that might be getting a cut of kind of advertising for the amount of volume that they have there. But the things that I find more interesting are some of these kind of micro donations and micro transactions. And so if I'm following along, I might have a membership that I subscribe to. There might be tips and donations that I make. There might also be sort of merchandise and downloads. And so if we kind of think about not just cultivating community, but finding a way to be able to be crude, monetize it, there are sort of new ways that we can start to explore beyond, ticket sales. So what does this start to mean? I think there's a couple of things. One is you all have followings and fans of people that are patrons and supporters of the organization. I think there's probably a group of them that you can probably picture that are your fans that not just love you, but are also joiners. And I think there's this sort of tribe that you can start to think about cultivating in a way that's really organic, that would be really welcomed by people that support you, and for people to be able to kind of look for more connection. And I think when we think about monetization in this context, it's less about giving money and it's more about providing support. I want to be able to, I welcome those opportunities for those brands and for those organizations that I want to be able to have thrive, to be able to contribute and be active within it. And so, like a small example of this, just to sort of show that not all of these things have to be kind of giant initiatives, I kind of look at um, like a used bookstore that's just in my neighborhood. Charming little place. Woman there is amazing, and she's got a lot of people that shop there. And then what she started to do was kind of putting a book club out in her back, and there was a number of people who showed up. And then what she started to do through a Facebook group that people joined was she did like a book club and then a movie night at our local theater that kind of talked through the movie and then you're meeting afterwards. And now they're doing a tour, kind of visiting a place that one of these authors was actually kind of writing about. And so I thought it was a really small but relatable example of somebody that sort of found her tribe and found ways using digital to be able to keep people connected and find ways for people to be able to kind of contribute back to the store. And so it's not all about selling books. It's about kind of building this tribe that, by the way, is going to buy more books. So what does that start to do? What does that, like, how can we start to make this real? And I would kind of think about it sort of a little bit connected to the concept of the value exchange. What is this sort of proposition that you can provide for those people that are kind of joiners and lovers of your organization? What are the kinds of things that they might be most interested in participating in? How do we start to kind of cultivate that and organize that group through different channels that are a little smaller and not horizontal, that are more niche and focused on what you are providing? How are we going to activate people within the community? What do we want them to do? How do we want them to share? How are they going to contribute? I think if we're moving away from more sort of passive scrolling to active engagement, what are the things that they can kind of participate in that they would love the opportunity to be able to do? And then how are we going to kind of monetize that? And again, reframe that from buying something to supporting something that they really love. And there's some interesting new tools as we just kind of walk through to be able to do that. Buying someone a coffee, providing them with a tip, they're kind of framed around kind of supporting something that you want to be able to see thrive versus buying something that you maybe want. Any thoughts or reaction to that, Catherine?
I'm thinking about a challenge that Alan Brown delivered to the people who were online for a webinar we did back in November, where he talked about something that I actually thought sounded terrifying, which was the end of sort of single recipient email marketing and database or CRM-based marketing. One of the things that he's been fascinated about through his career as a researcher is who are the people who lead the quest to attend a performance? Who are the organizers? Who are our advocates in community who are going to reach out to their friends and say, a beautiful thing is about to happen. You need to be part of it. How do we make it super easy for those passionate advocates to organize their friends and not go through some kind of weird hell of trying to figure out how to put a group together and get everybody sitting together while fighting through the map of the concert hall. So it's in the zone, that beautiful upper right-hand quadrant, but it's not quite directly addressed. Thoughts on that?
Yes, I love it. I love it because it's sort of interesting because it goes back. I didn't swear and I was bleeped. That was not what happened there. I love the question because there's sort of this model, and it was called like a technographics model when social media first came out. And they took a look at people's participation within social media communities, and it looked like a pyramid. So 90% of people that were participating within social media platforms were just kind of passive lurkers. Then there was 9% who kind of commented or kind of leaned in here and there. And there was this 1% that was kind of leading the charge. It kind of makes, it reminds me of what you're sort of describing there, Catherine. And I think there's almost like a different proposition for that person because their needs are so different. It's almost like they're not just want to be able to join, they want to lead. And so there's almost like a complementary thing is what does that community start to look like? But what does that leader need to be able to better do what they want to be able to do? It's almost like a separate persona of anyone's worked with personas, the people that want to join, the people that want to lead. And so how do we make it easy and make it sort of something that they want to be able to do? I love that thought and kind of thinking about that person differently than the broader community. Juan?
We have questions that came in online.
Amazing.
So we have from Chris McCool from Sultans of String. This is a really wonderful presentation. How much of the orchestra audience demographic is on TikTok versus Facebook or Instagram?
Yeah. So it's a great question because I'm kind of talking in very sort of like broad terms. When you start to, and there's research available, and I'm happy to follow up with some links that sort of break down social media usage by different demographic, and there is a big change. And so as you can imagine, some of these platforms kind of index a lot more high with sort of an older group than some with a younger group. I don't know how that maps exactly to kind of like an orchestra's profile, but it's a big consideration. And I think one of the things that I would offer there is, and it's probably pretty obvious, is not thinking about it as a mass audience, but understanding the segments that have different kinds of profiles and different kinds of value and different kinds of needs. So it can't be a one size fits all when we start to think about it. But that's one of the promises of digital marketing is that we can start. And the thing that I would say, and how it's great for Reels. Well, a lot of times that asset can be reused quite easily on these other sort of platforms. And so as an example, you might want to, I'm not recommending this, but if you start to think about answers, if you have a hypothesis about like a part of the audience being on TikTok, that could be, a fairly easy test to be able to run to sort of see if you get engagement in some of those other platforms. But it's a great point because it's not one blanket statement that I'm trying to make about like the engagement in social media. It's quite different across different cohorts. All right, so a couple minutes left, and I have a bonus trend. Let's do it. And so the metaverse. And so if we were talking about a year ago, this would probably be the tip on everybody's tongue. And so, what is the metaverse? No one's been able to really clearly describe it, which is probably one of the reasons why the interest in it has kind of crashed. If this was a wave, it's one that has sort of crashed down, at least in level of sort of like buzz and interest around it. However, one of the things I just wanted to kind of leave you with here around this concept of the metaverse was it was sort of this umbrella term that rolled up a lot more interesting and promising technologies, in my opinion. And so while we might not be searching for thinking about this idea of the metaverse, there's a couple of component parts that I think are kind of interesting waves on the horizon. Again, these aren't things that I would say you're kind of jumping on now, but things that I would propose you want to keep an eye on to see if they potentially are things that you might want to surf, 12, 18 months from now. The one is there's some real reach around social gaming. Again, this is going to break down a little bit by demographic, particularly age, but this isn't something that's just for a younger demographic. You're starting to see more people starting to use social gaming, particularly some of these gamings on apps that might be interesting places to be able to present yourself. I had somebody sort of describe it as these virtual environments, and within advertising, you're almost looking at as like virtual outdoor advertising within a virtual environment. And so these as platforms, I think are going to start to become kind of interesting for marketers to be present within. Digital collectibles, also commonly referred to as NFTs, is another area that's kind of interesting. I suspect as well, if we put some search in, it would kind of lose a little bit of steam because they were sort of things that were really of interest about 12, 18 months ago, and some of the valuations have really come down. I think the bigger part to this is not thinking about the technology, but thinking about ways to be able to provide your community something that's of value and exclusive. So if I can buy something that's very exclusive, maybe it kind of unlocks some of the benefits that I have with your organization. And so you might sell a digital collectible. I might be able to display it as my avatar exclusively, but it also might give me the rights to be able to download content or access something else that you might be providing to only exclusive members, as an example. And then finally, mixed reality. This is sort of an umbrella term for virtual reality, which is fully immersive, and augmented reality, which is sort of a digital overlay over a physical object or an environment. Sort of interesting, and I know there's been some experiments around doing things like performances in a virtual space. There's going to be some releases around hardware and software that are going to be driven by Apple, and usually when Apple drives something, consumer interest follows. And so there's anticipated changes around kind of a virtual reality headset that's coming out, as well as changes to a software development kit that makes designing, augmented reality things a lot easier. And so there might not be kind of a use case for everyone to jump on right now, but it's one of those waves that I would propose keeping an eye on, because there might be kind of interesting things to sort of provide. You think about kind of walking around. I'm doing some work now with a organization that has trails. And one of the things that we're testing is like QR codes on the trail that bring up, augmented reality and information about where you are. How can we sort of map that to maybe some of the things that might be happening in the orchestra? Kind of interesting to think through what that might look like. And so, so any questions around that? Conscious of time. Yep, Brian.
We have a question from Sheila Wisdom. I think our online audience was very fascinated about your presentation on TikTok. And so any tips on increasing your TikTok audience?
Yeah. Any thoughts? Stronger and stronger content. I hate to say that, it sounds super reductive, but that's the idea, is getting better at it, understanding what actually kind of drives engagement. And if you talk to somebody that is very active within it, they have a really good sense of what's really sort of driving audience response. And so the more you do it, and the more you're committed to getting it better, the byproduct of that is through audiences. So I would kind of focus on the content versus the engagement. The engagement will follow if the content gets stronger and more interesting. So just to kind of wrap up here before I let you go, generative AI, we want to be able to use these robots as servants, not as our masters. Start exploring, some of the ways these tools might be able to kind of save us some time, to be able to open more time up for what these tools can't do, which is originality and creativity. First-party data, let's prioritize the capture and validation of that data because that's really the fuel for a lot of the things that we want to be able to do from a digital marketing perspective. Part of that is figuring out what's your value exchange to be able to do that. Start thinking and acting like a creator and bringing video more into the forefront of your content strategy if you're kind of active within these channels, and try to figure out what does that content flywheel look like? How do you embrace the mindset, as David sort of talked about, of moving from photo to video, and how does that feel sort of natural to people and comfortable to be able to produce at scale? And finally, community. What is your sort of tribe, and what are some of the new ways that you can utilize digital to be able to kind of organize them, keep them engaged, and potentially kind of monetize them in new ways? And the final thought that I'll leave you with is that these waves are always coming. We want to be like my daughter here on the surfboard. We want to be able to learn how to surf because these waves are always coming. She would be absolutely horrified if she knew that this was actually on a training thing, but I couldn't miss an opportunity to be an embarrassing dad and throw that up there. So let's become surfers and keep aware of a lot of those waves and see which are the ones that are worth surfing. Thank you very much.